Hell yeah! Finally, there's an official way for people to play these games! Capcom has been doing a good job with these collections recently. It's great to see them bringing back their old arcade library for modern players to experience it. While arcade games are no longer popular in countries outside of Japan, many of them are standout titles that revolutionized gaming in some way, shape, or form. From titles like Pong, Pac-Man, Street Fighter 2, and Mortal Kombat. But there's one company I believe is home to some amazing arcade titles. Sega! We all know Sega are, and they seem to be doing pretty okay for themselves nowadays. Sonic is having more relevance again, the Yakuza / Like a Dragon series is getting more popular every year, and their purchase of Atlas seems to be doing pretty great for themselves with titles like Persona 5, Shin Megami Tensei 5, and their recently released Metaphor Fantasio. Hell, they're even making an initiative to bring back older IPs like Jet Set Radio and Crazy Taxi with brand new titles. However, I believe Sega has been lacking in bringing back many of their older arcade titles. They have such a rich arcade history ranging from titles like Flicky, Virtua Fighter, The House of the Dead, and plenty more. And that will be the topic for this video. I want to make a sort of wish list detailing various titles that I would put into a hypothetical Sega Arcade Collection featuring titles from the late 1970s all the way to titles from the early 2000s. Sega has tried to bring arcade titles before in different ways, but considering today's climate, I believe that nowadays a collection of various titles would be the most financially beneficial way to go about it. It seems that companies like Capcom and Bandai Namco have been going that route, instead of releasing their games separately on digital stores. Back during the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 days, that's what Sega did, and they did it once again with their Sega Ages line on the Nintendo Switch. That line was well-intentioned, but unfortunately was misguided. While the emulation that M2 provided for these games was great, and the extra features each title had were nice, the matter of the fact is, the games we were selling, most of them had already been re-released before, like Sonic 1 and 2, Columns, and Phantasy Star. The titles that were brand new just got lost in the Switch's eShop. Not helping things was the fact that all of these titles were being sold for $7 each, which was not worth it for some of these games. So, my proposal is to put many of these titles into a single collection, and while there are some logistical aspects I'll be looking at before I say the game list, I want this collection to be massive. I want this collection to be given the same kind of love and attention that the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection had. A wide variety of games covering various genres should be available to play, alongside some behind-the-scenes footage and modern features like save states and online play if possible. One thing I should point out is that considering the mere size of the game list I'm proposing, I think this collection should be split into 3 volumes, each representing different eras for the company. The first volume will be covering their early days, the second volume will be covering their early 3D ventures, and the third volume will be covering their more modern arcade titles, most of which were released on their Naomi arcade board. Furthermore, and this is extremely important, all 3 volumes need to be guaranteed to release. I do not want Sega to say that they'll release Volume 1, and then if it sells well, they'll consider making a Volume 2 and a Volume 3. Some of the titles that will be featured in Volume 1 already have been re-released and only cover one era. There are many gamers out there that want to experience many of Sega's 3D titles, so it's best for everyone to, whenever this hypothetical collection is announced, announce all 3 volumes are coming only within months of each other, with work on volumes 2 and 3 already being close to being completed, if not straight up done. I should clarify that I'll only be focusing on arcade titles for these volumes. While I would love to see collections or re-releases of games from their Sega Saturn and Dreamcast libraries, I believe those should be saved for different collections. Some of the titles that will be covered here also got Saturn and Dreamcast versions, but I think that both their arcade and console versions should be re-released, just in separate collections. As an example, one of the volumes of this Sega Arcade Collection would include the original Virtua Fighter with its arcade version, while a hypothetical Saturn collection would include the Saturn version of that title. The reason why I'm separating them is to provide both of these collections with ways of playing that game, but those collections' overall libraries would be distinct enough to encourage players to buy both if they're interested in playing various titles. Because each volume would have a significant amount of titles, it would generally be encouraged for players to try out most, if not all of the titles, as opposed to just a couple. Of course, I should bring up some of the problems that some of these titles may have. A recurring one we'll be seeing throughout the game list is potential copyright concerns. Now, I'm not talking about porting third-party games on these collections. All of the games featured in this video were made by Sega, but some of these titles may include product placement or may have used licenses that could be difficult to get rights of. As an example, the game Sega Rally Championship uses Toyota and Lancia cars, so Sega would need to negotiate with those companies to fully re-release the game as it was originally intended. A similar case is present with Ferrari in the Outrun games. As a matter of fact, in the Sega Ages re-release of Outrun, they removed all Ferrari imagery. However, and in spite of how unrealistic this may sound, I'm saying to hell with that. The objective of this collection should be to re-release and preserve these arcade titles in their original form as much as possible, so I would encourage Sega to talk to many of these companies to have those licenses once again. Of course, considering these volumes include various titles, negotiations may be very tough, but I believe it should be done. Nintendo was able to get the Kawasaki license back for Wave Race 64 on the Wii U Virtual Console and Nintendo Switch Online services, so I believe Sega should do that too. I'll try not to go overboard with those types of games in this video, and I'll be mentioning some of games that I already believe would be extremely unlikely to come back, but there are some titles where the game needs to be re-released because of how integral it was to the company's history in some way, shape, or form. Before I dive into the game list, I also want to talk about what the collection would have in terms of features. Many arcade collections nowadays include things like save states and online play, especially the Capcom Fighting collections. I believe this should also hold true for all 3 volumes of the Sega Arcade Collection. Of course, some of these titles don't have multiplayer components, so their online features would only be limited to leaderboards. But for games like Daytona USA and Virtua Fighter, they should absolutely have online play with rollback netcode. Considering the number of titles featured, I could see this taking a huge amount of time to develop. Compilations like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Cowabunga collection already don't have all games playable online, and all 3 of these volumes would feature more than 12 titles. But I believe that giving as many of these titles online multiplayer is something that not only would be fantastic to play, but also would give the consumer trust on Sega. Trust that they are paying attention to what the people want. So, with all of that being said, let's look at each of the 3 volumes and see what games each of them would have. I should preface that I haven't played all these games, but my goal will be to cover as many genres as possible and offer players with a wide range of titles. Volume 1: Monaco Grand Prix, 005, Super Locomotive, Zaxxon, Congo Bongo, Flinky, Champion Boxing and Hang-On, Ninja Princess, Space Harrier, Alex Kidd The Lost Stars, Fantasy Zone, Wonder Boy, Outrun, Afterburner, Alien Syndrome, Shinobi, Thunderblade, Super Hang-On, Wonder Boy Monsterland, Altered Beast, Gain Ground, Power Drift, Wonder Boy Free Monster Lair, Cyber Police E-SWAT, Golden Axe, Shadow Dancer, Super Monaco Grand Prix, Turbo Outrun, Alien Storm, Columns, Bonanza Bros, G-Lock Air Battle, Radmobile, Golden Axe The Revenge of Death Adder, Puyo Puyo, Pulse on Action Tent R and Ichidant R, Outrunners. And finally, there's 2 special titles I want to talk about for Volume 1. The first one is Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, a game that has never been re-released because of its trackball controls. While I'll admit that they're a unique part of the game, it's best if the game got re-released with reworked controls so that people could finally play it. It's best to be able to play the game this way than to not be able to play it at all. The other game is Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, which I realized would be extremely unlikely to get the rights to, not only because Michael Jackson has unfortunately passed away, but also it doesn't seem likely that Sega would negotiate with the Jackson estate. However, I still wanted to include it because of its importance to Sega and Michael Jackson overall being a fan of video games, and requesting Sega a few times to want to be involved in some way. Of course, it should also be reiterated that this would be a re-release of the arcade version, not the Mega Drive version, although a re-release of that would also be neat. As you can see by this list, Volume 1 is focused on Sega's earlier titles from the late 70s to the early 90s. Because of the simplicity of these games, it's the volume with the most quantity of titles, but it will also be priced the cheapest. Considering the extra features I talked about earlier, I think a fair price for Volume 1 would be around $40. Volume 2, Virtua Racing, Virtua Fighter 1, 2, 3, and Kids, Virtua Cop 1 and 2, the Team USA 1 and 2, Virtua Striker 1 and 2, Sega Rally Championship and Sega Rally 2, Fighting Vipers 1 and 2, Last Bronx, Man TT Superbike, Sega Touring Championship, Sonic the Fighters, Virtual On Cyber Troopers, and Cyber Troopers Virtual Ontario Tangram, Sega Water Ski, Winter Heat, Sega Bass Fishing, Scud Race, Groove on Fight, Dynamite Cop, Golden Axe the Duel, The House of the Dead. As you can see, Volume 2 is focused more on Sega's early 3D ventures, featuring games that were released on their Sega Model and Sega Titan arcade boards. I even decided to throw in an Atlas fighting game just because Sega owns the company now and we need to have a little bit of a bonus there. Licenses would be a bit harder to get for some of these games, but as I had mentioned before, I think it's best if Sega goes out of their way to negotiate with those companies. While there are less games on Volume 2, they are generally of a bigger production value than previously, and there's a bigger emphasis on online play, so I'd price Volume 2 at around $50. Volume 3, The House of the Dead 2, Crazy Taxi, F355 Challenge, Puyo Puyo Da, Samba de Amigo, Sega Marine Fishing, Virtua Tennis, Virtua Striker 2 version 2000, Zombie Revenge, Cyber Troopers Virtual On Force, Monkey Ball, Virtua Fighter 4, Virtua Striker 3, Wild Riders, Puyo Pop Fever, The House of the Dead 3, Crazy Taxi 3 High Roller, Outrun 2, Virtua Cop 3, Ollie King, Sega Golf Club, Virtua Striker 2002, Virtua Striker 4, The House of the Dead 4, Sega Rally 3. Additionally, there is a title from a series that I really like that I think would be very neat to have on this collection. Yeah, it wouldn't be a Rhino Dino list without having a Loop on the Third game. It was to my surprise that there did exist a Loop on the Third game on the Sega Naomi arcade board, and would actually be relatively easy to get the rights of, because TMS Entertainment, one of the current right holders for Loop on the Third, is part of Sega Sammy. So it's just a matter of TMS Entertainment and Sega just start communications to port one of the older Loop on the Third games onto this collection. Especially because not a whole lot of Loop on the Third games have ever been re-released. And that's Volume 3, a volume that's more focused on games released on their Sega Naomi arcade board, and also some others that came out afterwards. I do realize that I'm risking it a bit with this volume, as a lot of games that are on it have aged extremely well and could easily get individual remasters. But I believe that putting them in a collection like this would not only be consumer friendly, but also give the customer a lot of trust in Sega. Considering this, I think Volume 3 would most likely be priced at $60. And that's the game list for all 3 volumes of the Sega Arcade Collection. I know it's a very extensive list, and I realize that this collection would most likely not happen, at least in this form. I know that I was very unrealistic, but I believe, once again, that these games should be preserved and re-released for more audiences. Additionally, Sega has announced that they would be delisting over 60 titles from their digital libraries over on PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, and Steam. Some of these titles have not been re-released since the 7th generation of consoles with the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. While many of these titles are not arcade titles, unlike what I've said in this collection, I do hope that those titles as well are re-released. With all of that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and thank you for watching. Till next time.